where the sacred meets the secular, offering safe, grounded, practical, and responsible guidance for guides. This is the Psychedelic IQ Podcast. Some days I really have to pinch myself when I remember, and I'm truly grateful for the type of people that I get to meet doing this work, and specifically spending so much time with me to talk about their passions on this podcast. And today is definitely one of them. This guest not only comes with an enormous amount of medical and clinical knowledge, but has done so much deep work in his own healing path and his own lineage, which does not come from South America, but rather like a European lineage. And we even get to talk about how to go back and find and tap in to our own personal lineages. I think the most amazing part of a lot of this conversation is how directly Neil has been connected to not only 15 years of working with Stan Grof, but also being a mentee of Ralph Metzner. It was probably one of my favorite episodes to record this season. So without any further ado, Neil Hanon is a Canadian psychiatrist who holds the position of clinical assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of British Columbia and serves as the director of Year 3 in the Southern Medical Program of UBC at Kelowna General Hospital, and is a founding board member of the Ketamine Assisted Therapy Association of Canada. Dr. Hanon got first involved in holotropic breath work as a participant, working directly with Stan and Christina Grof to help with his grief after the death of his 17-year-old son. He continued his training and in 2015 became a certified as a holotropic breathwork facilitator. Driven by his own journey, Neil developed a keen interest in treating grief and spiritual emergence and co-founded Relief for Grief, which evolved into Jamaica Grief Retreats, offering legal psilocybin mushroom journeys to parents who have lost a child. In 2021, Neil was invited by Stan and Brigitte Grof to co-lead the Canadian arm of Grof Legacy Training International and continues to lead the psychedelic arm of this training program in Canada. It is with great pleasure that I get to introduce you today to Neil Hanon. Neil Hanon, thanks for joining us on the Psychedelic IQ Podcast.
Oh, really great to be here. Thank you very much.
So before we get started, I'm going to ask you a fundamental question. What is your intention for joining us today?
Really to talk about psychedelics and psychedelic training and how to make sure that people are educated properly about how to use these medicines and how to help people who need these medicines for their healings.
Perfect. We're in the right place. So first question that I have for you, just tell us a little bit about what it is that you're working on now and like what kind of life do you live today?
I have, I think, 3.5 jobs or something like that, but full-time jobs. But basically, why we're on this podcast is that I'm the lead trainer for Grof Psychedelic Training or Grof Legacy Training International in Canada. I'm and in Canada, what we call that organization is Grof Psychedelic Training Academy. And if you put a .ca at the end, then you get to our website. And so we have a whole bunch of training for working with medicines and people, so that there's a lot of didactic, a lot of lectures, videos, class interactions, and experiences as well. Because you cannot work with these medicines if you don't have your own experiences.
Yeah. I think that we're in very much agreement there. So that's what you're working on today. Tell me how you got here. Like, what got you to this place?
I started out my career as a family doctor, a general practitioner surgeon, then actually went back and became a psychiatrist. And I was a fairly standard psychiatrist working in hospitals with a very acute psychiatric patients. I still do that work. And in 2007, my 17-year-old son died in a car crash. And so I was suddenly catapulted into really an extreme grief. He was my oldest son, and modern medicine, modern psychiatry, modern psychology had nothing to offer me to help with my grief. So I went looking. And what does any educated person do when they need to answer a question is they hit the books. And I kept reading and reading and reading, and discovered a variety of people, but I kept running across Stan Grof over and over again. And I thought, maybe, just maybe, this guy has something for me. And so I read people. That's probably why I'm a psychiatrist. And if I'm in the presence of someone, I can tell if they're the real deal. If I'm not in the presence and just read their stuff, I can't tell. So I knew that I had to go and do a breath work with Stan, found him and went to that breath work. And that started the process of my journey out of my grief. So.
Mm-hmm. So when did you first start working with breathwork, and presumably, did you work directly with Stan in that first session?
Yeah, it was really interesting. Stan at that point was married to Christina, and they lived in Mill Valley in just north of San Francisco. And they were working with, Stan, of course, he was on academic staff of CIIS, and he also was a faculty of Wisdom University, which has since become Ubiquity University. But the Wisdom University was running a program in 2010, I think it was, and just above Mill Valley at a mansion up there. And so I joined that and had my first breath work, and Stan was teaching. It was actually quite a spectacular. It was an event to celebrate Stan's 80th birthday, which was happening the next July 1st. So Angelise Arian was there talking. There was, so many people. And I cannot believe that I actually accidentally fell into all of these spectacular, wonderful academics and so on at this thing. And Stan, of course, was speaking too. And that was my first breath work. And if you know anything about breath work, I had in a book that was written just recently, just came out, celebrating Stan's 90th birthday. He just turned 93, but there was a book written by Brigitte Grof, his current wife, and she asked a whole bunch of us to send in the story. And that's the story that I sent in. And I had a perinatal matrix 2, 3, and 4 experience, and Stan wanted to know what my chart was. And so Rick Tarnas read my birth chart and so on. But
my Lord,
that story is in that book. Anyway.
Wow. Yeah. So you, synchronicity abounds. You find yourself maybe living the closest to your dharmic path as ever. It seems like that you were sort of pushed over the edge into the well of the transpersonal work.
Yes,
it sounds
absolutely.
Yeah. So you have since become a trainer with Grof breathwork.
Well, yeah. So I train psychedelics for Grof Legacy International. I train breath work as well with Grof Legacy International. Yeah. The psychedelic journey, I certified as a facilitator in breath work, and then I needed to go deeper. I felt like I needed to go deeper. And so I was then sent to Ralph Metzner, because as it turns out, Ralph lost a son as well, which is why I was sent to Ralph. And Ralph Metzner started working with me, and ended up becoming another mentor of mine as well. But
so we talked a little bit. You had mentioned Ralph in our pre-show interview, and one of the things that I find fascinating about your story, and that it really lives in my heart as well, is this integration of the secular and the sacred. And I know today I absolutely value the work of psychiatry and therapy, and clearly the work of psychedelic work and the places that it can take us that we really can't explain. So I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit about how you approach or maybe experience your psychiatry work, which you still do,
mm-hmm.
and this really unexplainable element that Western medicine may never be able to explain.
Yeah. So I suppose in the psychedelic world, I'm kind of an anomaly because I'm a psychiatrist, and my lineage is, I have these multiple lineages, of course. Like, I have my academic psychiatry lineage, which is extremely valuable. And and it goes all the way back, to Asclepius, really. And, in Greek mythology and ancient Greece, and the way that medicine has come all through the years. So that's a very, very important legacy as well. But there's this psychedelic legacy, that I really value some of the things that Ralph taught me about my own indigenous past. And when I say indigenous, I'm talking about my true indigenous past, which is Northern European ancestry. And interestingly, I have 0 North American indigenous blood. I've done my DNA and so on. It's all Northern European. And so the Northern European religious system in our ancient and indigenous ancestors, they used non-ordinary states of consciousness. And to say that that's not part of our ancestry makes no sense whatsoever. And Ralph wrote a book about this called The Well of Remembrance. And I strongly advise people to actually, for white Northern European people, read it. You don't need to steal people's stuff from other cultures. Do the work, look at your own ancient indigenous culture. And so then what happened? Then, of course, Stan, with LSD, Stan started understanding what LSD could really do, these non-ordinary states. And Ralph and Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert, who became Ram Dass, they figured out the LSD stuff in a different kind of vein, but we're trying to frame it into psychology. So all of this really needs to be brought together. Now, there is use in psychiatric medications, in psychotherapies, and so on, but anybody who's done their own work in psychedelics knows that there is not one thing that fixes everything. There is, as soon as you reduce anything so that it's understandable for our puny brains, it becomes false. And so it's very complex. We need every piece of information everywhere. We need every single person everywhere. And all together, we can maybe make something good happen. But that's the way psychiatric knowledge, this ancient wisdom about non-ordinary states, this term that Stan uses is holotropic, moving towards wholeness, and that all that together is necessary. It's not just psychedelics will fix everything, or psychiatry can fix everything, or, it's going to be these molecules and receptors. That's not everything. That's every bit of that is just a piece of the picture.
Yeah. Well, I could go down at least 5 different paths right there. But what I actually want to, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions on the psychiatry piece. Today, would you say that when you prescribe antidepressants to an individual, what is the actual effect of those? Like, are those medications healing, in your perspective, are they healing in any way?
Okay, so I'm going to take a step back and lead you to
Please.
what I think you need to understand what I'm going to say. So in 1974, medicine started using a biopsychosocial model. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then Ralph introduced ecological. In fact, he called his whole psychology green psychology. And the death people they added spirituality. Now, if we take it out of those narrow margins and say, instead of biopsychosocial, we have bio, psychological, social, spiritual, and ecological. Because when we dump toxins into the lake over here, it comes back to me. When we chop down trees and it messes things up, that comes back to me. So everything is interactive. Okay. So if you have those 5 things and as circles and you make this big Venn diagram with that, then sometimes depression will be, now you're following me, right? Mm-hmm. So sometimes depression will be spiritual. Sometimes it will be biological. Sometimes it will be social. Sometimes it will be psychological. Sometimes it will be environmental. And so the job of someone like me in my day-to-day work on psychiatry is do a proper evaluation. Figure out what it is that's going on in this person who is in front of me. If it's biological, let's use a biologic.
Yep.
But if it's something else, if it's spiritual, okay, what do we have for spiritual stuff? We have the medicine, the psychedelics. Yeah. Like 70% of any person in any given session will have a spiritual experience, and they are changed. Okay, so, but do psychedelics treat a social depression? I don't think so. It all depends on the overlap on the Venn. Now, again, I don't want to be too reductionistic because then it becomes false, but lots of times there are overlaps. And so you need some of this, you need some of this, and you need some of that. That is the proper treatment of people, but you have to do a proper assessment to know. And you can't just be doing the standard psychiatric assessment without asking about spirituality. You cannot do a standard psychiatric assessment of a person and not be asking them about their relation to the environment. Do you ever get your fingernails dirty from growing things? You know? Anyway, you get where
no, thank you for approaching the question from a different perspective than how I initially asked it, because I think that what you just did was actually answered the previous question. How do we integrate the sacred and the secular? How do we approach this? That there are these 5 different spheres and they overlap with each other in a lot of different ways. You know, I think that I would say half the people that I talk to, if I'm talking to people in this that are coming from a very purely spiritual, maybe indigenous perspective, they're going to tell me medication is bad. You should never take medication. It's too hard to get off the medication once you're on. The coming off is so difficult, and that's half the folks that I connect with on a pretty regular basis. My personal view is that sometimes, honestly, like even if the depression is not biological, and maybe you can correct me here, the way that I think about this, that even if the depression is not biological, but we can find a pill to temporarily bring some balance or homeostasis to the system, then it allows us to go and do deep work in other places. So I don't know what your thoughts are there.
Yeah. So it starts getting more and more complicated the deeper we go into this. I can tell you that, like, I'm a psychiatrist that works in a hospital. When the police grab somebody off the street who's running down the street naked, I'm the person that they bring that person to. So, like, I'm dealing with really severe psychiatric illness in the hospital, as all of the hospital psychiatrists are. Now, our standard medications that we use save lives. It saves lives. And, I mean, you have an opiate crisis like we do. Giving methadone saves lives. Giving Suboxone saves lives. See, these are all medications that, Marcia Linehan, I love her. She's dialectical behavioral therapy. She created that. And one of her lines is, there's no treatment if you're dead.
Yeah.
And so, there's a pyramid here. First we have to have you alive. Then we have to make sure that you can eat and drink, sort of reverse Maslow's hierarchy, So yes, medication sometimes, even if it's not truly biological, will help. Okay. But then, so you've got the person who's safe, you've got them into some kind of housing, you've got something that you can work with. Okay, now take them the rest of the way.
Yeah.
But different things are required at each stage of that journey.
100%. It makes total sense. And I appreciate you unpacking that a little bit. What do you think today of the approach that we see, let's say, in most of the clinical studies that are coming out, that, like, if we're just looking at the brain, if we're just looking at psychedelics through a biological lens as it relates to the brain, or if we're just looking at psychedelics through like a psychosocial therapeutic lens, and the people that are practicing out in the world, and maybe I oftentimes see this in the ketamine space a lot. MDs just bringing somebody in, putting them in a chair, shooting them up with ketamine, sending them out, and assuming that this is some biological change that happens and ignoring a lot of the rest. What would your hope be if you could change anything about the way that psychedelics are being used today in the clinical system? What would you like to change?
Oh my goodness. What I would like to change, come to our training.
Okay.
So, but to answer your question, so I do ketamine therapy every Thursday afternoon. I do 6 patients with a nurse, and it's, these are patients that I've been looking after. I know they're treatment-resistant depression or treatment-resistant depression with anxiety. And so I've tried many things, hasn't worked. Even many of these people have had ECT, hasn't worked. And I try them with intramuscular ketamine, and I do that. But I do it I don't do it in the strict medical model. That hurts me to say that, because I think what I'm doing is the medical model, but I know what you mean by the medical model, which is just not paying attention to the psyche. And so I talk with each person before they go in. I say, what's been happening? What are the relevant things that are coming on? And then we give them the injection. And then when they come out, well, first off, we use music, we use, earphones, the whole thing, like for real, as if it's a true medicine journey. And then when they come out, I'm saying, so did you get any teachings? What happened? What images did you see? What do you think that's meaning? So we start working on integration, and we treat the ketamine like a psychedelic medicine. Now, it's not psychedelic for everybody, but that's that's the way that we do it. Now, I was one of the people that brought ketamine to our hospital, and it pains me. So if I have a patient that is in there, I bring my headphones, I bring my music set, and so on. But the other psychiatrists that are working, they pop in and say, "Hi, how are you doing? Ready? Yep. Okay. Injection. See you later." And then they might get a report from the nurse about what their blood pressure or heart rate was like. And I'm just going, this is such a waste to only see it as a chemical. And, Ralph Metzner talked about first-person empiricism. He said we cannot use the standard scientific paradigm of getting a whole group of people and think you know what you've done with psychedelics. And the Dalai Lama calls it first-person empiricism. It's the repeated sessions in the same person, looking at what are the changes and taking a person through. Now, Stan did that. Stan Groff did that in 4,000 LSD sessions, and so he knows what it is. He didn't publish all that in papers. He wrote it in his books. But we know what the correct model is, and it's not being done because it's being pushed a certain direction by this very narrow view of what science is, and science is so much more than that. I mean, reading the Dalai Lama, you go like, that's the science of spirituality. Like, oh my God, and he's going like, why can't, I mean, he's such a nice guy, but my fantasy of him is, why can't you get this? Like, this is the way that science needs to be done.
So I'm actually rereading Autobiography of a Yogi right now, and Yogananda and the gurus that he worked with in the lineage. I'm just astounded by the amount of science that I'm reading in that book, which is not supposed to be about science. And frankly, the other part of it is that I love about that book is how all the corollaries that he draws between the Vedantic and the Vedantic tradition and the lineages and Christianity, how so much of what we know in the Bible today is explained in a very similar way in the Vedantic traditions, Hindu traditions. So I really appreciate that. And I think that that's what I was hoping that you would say, that if we could figure out a way as scientists, as medical practitioners, to zoom out farther, to include biopsychosocial, ecological, spiritual, to be able to look at all of these clients from those 5 different overlapping areas, we would be able to make a lot more progress a lot faster with the clients that are currently working in the medical model today.
Yeah.
The traditional medical model.
And I just want to add, William James talked about this 1900.
Yeah. Yeah. So first, thanks for that. That's very helpful. I am going to go back now to something that you said. And while you were sharing this, I actually went back to my 23andMe report, and it says 99.9% European, 46.4% British and Irish, a little French and German. But I'm curious what Ralph taught you, because this is something that I literally just looked at this not more than 2 days ago, because there's been something in the field that has been calling me to go farther back to my personal indigenous roots.
Mm-hmm.
And as I have this desire to connect with planet Earth, Pachamama, I feel like there might be an easier opening for me to connect through my indigenous lineage rather than solely through the teachers that I'm working with in Peru. So I'm wondering if you can just talk a little bit about your experience there and what you learned and what Ralph might have to say about that today.
Yeah. So wow. So, I mean, in ancient Norse mythology, we have the world tree, Yggdrasil. Everybody has their world tree. Like almost every single culture has their world tree. At the bottom of Yggdrasil is the Well of Remembrance. Anybody who's done their own work with psychedelics has gone into their Well of Remembrance, often actually literally. You have the well in front of, or the lake or what pond, whatever it is in front of you. And my experience was ask any question that you have and it will be answered. And of course, Wotan went into the Well of Remembrance and had to lose an eye. That was the price. And that is the price. Because when you go into the well, then you have one eye in the underworld and you have one eye in the above world. And if you don't want to have one eye there, don't go into the Well of Remembrance. And that is our ancestral tradition. Your ancestry is very similar to mine. And but it's also important to know what destroyed our culture and why we became the aggressors. My ancestors have been in North America since 1650. So they were some of my ancestors were some of the original, colonizers. And I'm not proud of that. However, it's something that I have to accept and I have to be able to say. And that with that comes a responsibility as well. Okay, so going back to our ancient ancestors, they were overrun, and the men killed, and the women raped, and our ancestors were the people who settled along the rivers in the Yamnaya culture, and like there's many of these cultures that are ancient, and the late Stone Age and so on. And the European museums are full of our ancestral stuff, absolutely chock-a-block full. And so we can learn all kinds of things about our own ancestral tradition from the museums and from the wonderful archaeologists who keep pulling up stuff in Europe, and the understanding of the language drift and all that stuff. And then, of course, our ancestors had to defend themselves. The Romans hired our ancestors, and then we went and we were mercenaries for them because our ancestors were such good warriors and so on. But then we became we were the people who were destroyed, and then our ancestors were the survivors and then became the aggressors and blah, 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 blah. But when you do your own work, you start going into all this stuff, and our ancestors are calling us all the time because we're the leading edge for them. They know what they did wrong, and they're calling us to do the right thing.
It's beautiful. Thank you for sharing all of that. How important do you think that work was? Going back and doing your better understanding your lineage, how important do you think that was in the work that you do today?
I would say critical. I call all people, and I'm white. It's obvious I'm white, and I'm especially talking to the white people. Go to your ancestors. They want to talk with you. They want you to understand, and they have incredible wisdom that they can give to you that help you in this crazy world situation we're in right now. And one of the things that I say, there is no problem left on this planet that can be solved with one brain. Zero. And our problems are so complex, I would say that it probably will take so many brains together to get it to happen that if we don't do that, we are sunk. And so if we call on our ancestors, don't we not just have everybody here now, but we have everybody who's ever been here to solve the problems.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to shift now and maybe look at your the starting of your lineage in this incarnation. And maybe we'll start sort of at Stan. You're deeply embedded and have been connected with Stan, for a long time now, and in teaching in that lineage. Tell me, what do you think the importance of knowing Stan's lineage, and what do we need to pay attention to?
Stan is the guy that was able to map out the psyche to our current need for fitting psychedelics in. Now, of course, his understanding came from psychedelics, so that makes perfect sense. But Stan was a Freudian analyst. He studied Freudian psychoanalysis, and then had his first LSD experience. I think was the first day of his psychiatry residency program, and that changed everything. And he thought psychoanalysis is way too slow. Forget that. He said that in those 8 hours that he did that first LSD session, he was more changed than 7 years of psychoanalysis. And so, but then he said, I'm devoting my life to this. So he did. And over these thousands of LSD sessions, he realized that yes, there's the unconscious. Yes, there is the Jungian collective unconscious. Absolutely. But we have memory of our birth. And what I mean is the birth process. And it is a very, very important thing, because he calls them the perinatal matrices. First perinatal matrix is before labor starts. Second perinatal matrix is when labor starts, and there's no way out. It's hell for the baby. Then the cervix is fully dilated. The baby starts moving, and maybe, just maybe, there's a solution here. And then finally birth, and wow, the goddess, you get stuck on the goddess's breast, and it's like, oh my God, there's nothing better than this. And so, but that sequence you keep going back to in psychedelic sessions, and so you may go to hell repeatedly, and then you may go to the possible solution. You may go to the oceanic of the first perinatal matrix, and you hopefully will get eventually, if you do enough work, you'll get to the birth. But interestingly enough, that's the gate. The perinatal area is the gateway to the transpersonal. And so these are joined in what we call coexes. Jung called them complexes, but Stan called them a coex because there's things that happen in the birth process are related to things that happen in your own biography. You may have had kids pile on you and you felt you were being suffocated. You may have had your umbilical cord around your neck during the birth process. And there may be many biological things, and then that may send you into the transpersonal realm where you experience previous lives where you were being choked. You may have been hung. You may have, like, all these things. And so if you don't know this cartography of the psyche, and you're trying to help someone and you don't know it, you have no idea where they are in this process. And Stan, from all of his work with all the psychedelics, he figured out what needs to be done when you don't do anything, when you do need to do things. And there's this concept of doing, not doing. And, most of the time it's important not to do and not to project your own stuff on the person who's in their medicine journey. And we can, and that's why the training is so necessary to understand all this stuff. And people can continue on. You may have unlocked something psychodynamic in them, and now the session is over and they're struggling with that in their life because you've partially uncovered it with the psychedelic. And so you need to know how to deal with that. And so it's not just, I know how to sit for a person, and somebody sat for me 3 times, and now I can sit for people. And no. This is really complicated stuff. And one thing that Ralph said to me, he said, Neil, don't stick your neck out too far. This may not be the time that psychedelics are actually legalized. He said, there's lots of weird stuff going on, and that may shut it all down again.
Yeah.
And the way out of that is, let's do it right this time.
Tell me a little bit more about doing, not doing. I don't know why I wrote the words down when you said them. So there must be something important that we're supposed to hear about this.
Yeah, doing, not doing. So, one of the stories that Stan tells is this sitter who had a miscarriage and then was never able to have children, and she's sitting for this fellow in a holotropic state, and this was in a group that Stan was running, and the person starts rocking. The person in the holotropic state sits up and starts rocking and is crying. And the woman takes him and starts rocking him like a baby. And then in the debrief afterwards, the sharing circle afterwards, the guy starts talking about how incongruent that was for him in the holotropic session, because he was a warrior, in a Norseman, a warrior. I'm not sure if it was Viking or not, but a Norseman. And he was in a battle with his group, and his best friend, I can't remember if it was his brother or not, but was killed, and he was holding him, rocking him, crying. And this woman thought, that was the sitter, is rocking him as if he's a baby and stroking his cheek, saying, "Oh, boo, it's okay, baby," and so when a person is in a holotropic state, we as the facilitators or sitters have no idea what's going on. We can hypothesize and then maybe talk with the person, afterwards and see what it was and see if we're right or wrong. But even in psychodynamic psychotherapy, I would say interpretations are wrong 95% of the time, even by trained people, let alone someone who's not trained. So that's the sort of thing. So you don't have to do, if someone's crying, maybe all that you need to do is witness. Maybe you don't need to do anything else. Let them ask. Let them ask for what they need. If they need a hand held, you want to work out ahead of time that if they put their hand out like this, that's what they mean. They want a hand held. And so you can work out stuff ahead of time, so that you don't interfere with the process, because that's the worst thing that you can do. What we do with these medicines is it helps the person's own psyche move towards wholeness, and it doesn't need anybody else interfering with that usually. So the sitter or the facilitator should be in this constant, in my view, in this constant distress about, should I do something? Shouldn't I do something? I don't know. Maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't. But that's where they need to be.
Yeah, there's a constant evaluation. And I think that we've even, I think it was another podcast guest, Christina Hunter, this season, was talking about, well, if I hand somebody a tissue while they're having this big process and lots of tears, am I handing them the tissue because they've asked for it and they need it? Or am I handing it because I'm somehow uncomfortable with this person having their big process? And I think that until we do a lot of our own work, it's really tricky to know what's ours and what's somebody else's, and to be able to sort of stay leaned back, or I guess maybe straight up in this case, rather than leaning forward. And I think that's one of the biggest pieces, at least for me, why we as facilitators need to be doing all of our own work, whether that is in the psycho realm, like the psychosocial realm, or whether that's in the medicine, but we need to be doing all of that, as much of our work as we possibly can.
Absolutely. Like, I don't think you cannot do this work without doing your own work.
Yeah. You touched on coming into wholeness, that the soul sort of naturally has this desire to be whole. When I heard doing and not doing, I also sort of heard directive and non-directive. I'm curious if you could share a little bit about your thoughts on directive versus non-directive. And maybe I'm going to go maybe one step further. Does this change for you between breath work and psychedelics, or is it pretty much the same model for you?
So the Stan's holotropic breath work, or the Groff breath work, is a very particular model. And in that model, there is no intention. The intention is to allow the process to unfold as it will. Now, there's the film The Way of the Psychonaut, that was done by Lajoie. Wonderful film. Recommend that people watch that. And there are some interviews that, if you buy the movie, there are interviews there. And there's a great interview with Ralph and Stan. It's about, 6 minutes or 10 minutes long segment. And it's Ralph and Stan argued about intention their entire careers. Okay. And where they've come to is it's really important. So Ralph's point is it's really important to have an intention, that you go into a psychedelic session with an intention. But Stan says no intention, but what I think what they really both mean, and what they come to in this interview that was done by Susan Lajoie, is that Ralph says, have an intention, but don't hold on to it so tight that if your psyche decides that there's another area that needs to be worked on, that you allow that to happen. And that's what Stan's biggest issue about intention is, that people hold on to it so tight that it just disrupts the session itself. But intention actually is kind of a lifeline when you get into really tough places in psychedelic sessions too. And so your sitter is a lifeline, and your intention can be a lifeline, but not holding on to it so tightly that your psyche can't go where it needs to go.
I think what I just heard was, when your intention has some attachment or something, when it turns into an expectation, that's where we can, like, sometimes it can be fine and we can continue heading down the intention path and we make some progress. But when the intention sort of begins to become an expectation and the medicine wants to take us in a different place, and we're holding on to, as a sitter or as the client, if we're holding on to that and trying to direct somebody down that path when the medicine doesn't want to go there, it may cause more difficulty, if not damage, than what we want.
Yeah. See, I see that as the traditional medical model, right? I know and you don't know, and I'm going to tell you, and that's ridiculous. Like, how do any of us know anything, really? But, especially another person's unconscious. We struggle a lot with our own unconscious. How can we know someone else's unconscious, really? So
I'm going to ask a personal question, I think, or a question that comes up for me sometimes, related to individual work versus group work. So individual work, we have an opportunity usually in individual work to be more engaged with the client. Like maybe the client brings some content up and we ask them questions. So if we try and say that we're non-directed, but we are engaging with the client to help them kind of come to some resolution, versus group work where we put everybody in a circle. Let's just think of an ayahuasca circle maybe, and we just put everybody in a circle and they take the medicine and we just allow the medicine to work exactly the way that it's going to. And it's really between the medicine and the person. There's facilitation in the group. There's a curandero or somebody that might be holding the space and the energy, but they're not involved in anybody's process. Do you see an advantage or disadvantage to either one of those? And is there speed? Like, can people make more progress doing individual work that is sort of targeted or intentional with a facilitator versus going in with without assistance? Does that question make sense?
Yeah. So I would say that there is another way, which we do in our training, which is have half the people doing the medicine, with each one of them having a sitter.
Yep.
And that sitter, and now I'm training people to be how to do this work. So they're writing anything that person says. They're charting body movements. They're just keeping track of everything. There are facilitators walking around. Okay, so that I see as an ideal model. Now, it's really important there has to be preparation ahead of time, and there has to be integration afterwards. Okay, so now for training purposes, that's the way. Now, the only way that I see psychedelic work becoming affordable is group work. Different therapists are charging for a single therapist, which I think is not a good idea. There always has to be at least two therapists, and in Stan's model, it should be male and female. If it's because there's often transference around the female person or a male person, and so on. That's why. So when you do it therapeutically, you can have people with similar things, such as traumas, if you're doing MDMA group work, or if you're doing psychedelic group work. Now, it can get loud, just like breath work can get very loud, but you can still do the same material. What happens in session is really, really important. That's when the psyche is speaking. That's when all the stuff is happening. That's when the death rebirth is happening. That's when the gods and goddesses start talking to you, and so on. But it's the integration that really needs to happen for therapeutic effect. And my own opinion is that people should not be doing, most people, again, there's no absolute, but most people shouldn't be having medicine journeys more frequently than at least once every 3 months, because there's so much material that needs to be integrated. Now, the sharing circles immediately after are bonding and help people to form community, that it helps all kinds of things other than just the specific material that the person is working on. So there's much more that happens in integration circles and then following up afterwards. So that I think that it can be done, absolutely it can be done individually, as long as there are two therapists, but that's very expensive. A nurse costs at least $60 an hour, or a psychiatrist costs $250 an hour. And so if you're looking at 6 or 10 hours, that's really expensive. And we do not want this just to be for wealthy white people. This cannot be. This is ancient sacred work. So somehow we have to make it affordable too. And so I see group work, and I don't see a downside to group work. It's as long as you have split it the way that I suggested, where you have a sitter and then you have facilitators walking around, making sure that everything is fine. And, if whatever a person needs, they make sure that they get, and so on. I think that can be a very economical way to do this work so that it becomes affordable.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I think, I had the opportunity to meet Stan and you the first time last year in Denver, and we had roughly 150 people breathing and 150 people sitting. And within, I don't know, each group of maybe 10, there were roughly 10 pairs, one facilitator that was sort of minding the store to make sure that everything was okay. So it sounds to me like what the Groff training, the approach is really extrapolated from the group work for breath work. And you're finding that methodology works really well when it's applied to the psychedelics as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Stan's research was done one-on-one. I think it's important to say that. But then for years, he worked out the breathwork model, and that model really fits well with this other work as well.
And it makes it highly accessible for lots of people. That was one of the things that I was very fascinated by with all of the medicine that I've sat with. A lot of indigenous medicine in Peru, the ceremonies are relatively quiet compared to what I saw in the breath work when we were in Denver. Like I saw a bigger, more expansive processes in breath work than I've seen in a lot of psychedelic work. So I absolutely believe in that model. Tell me, you mentioned how important integration is. Tell me what your definition of integration is. And for people that are not doing it, for practitioners that are not doing it, what would you say to them?
Well, first off, I'll start with a Ralph quote. And his quote is, "Why on earth would you go and visit a foreign country and not bring anything back from that foreign country?" Now, he's not talking about necessarily objects. He's talking about memories. He's talking about the stories of the journey to this foreign country. And he said, same for psychedelic work. And one of the things that he was very, very clear about, and which I do as well, is every session is recorded, audio recorded. And the person who's in the journey, and it doesn't matter if this is in a big group or an individual, they have to record it and they have to transcribe it. And then we talk about it.
Wow.
And that now, the more the therapist who's working with integration knows about Freud, knows about Jung, knows about all the all the big people, and even different Jungians and different Freudians, and all the people from psychodynamic psychiatry and so on. Now, that's just one area, but how about then you go to the mythologies of the world, and because people start pulling up all kinds of weird things from that are from mythologies of the world, like seeing the fan of a peacock, a peacock tail. Like, oh my goodness, there is so much mythology around that. Or you see Shiva, and you're some white guy who knows nothing about Shiva, and you get Shiva, and you go like, okay, you need to go and look up Shiva. Or, I mean, an absolute classic one is dragons. People see dragons. Now, when someone sees a dragon, I say, okay, your job is to go into Google, put in dragon, and then go to images and click on images and find your dragon. Because your dragon you'll find it in one of those pictures, you'll find it. And then you need to read about that dragon. And then you need to come to me and tell me all about this dragon. And then we can figure out what this thing is for your psyche. Not me telling you, but you go and look. And my job is to know that there are 1,000 different dragons, and that dragons, there's Eastern dragons and Western dragons and all that stuff. Okay. So, but if you know about snakes, it's really important to know about all these different symbols as a therapist helping someone with integration, because you not have a bias for or against ancestors and reincarnation and all this stuff. Whatever, like what the person brings is what they bring, and our job is to help integrate that into their life. So, what does this dragon mean about your life? Like, is this a protective dragon, or is this a dragon you have to kill? What is this? And so let's go into all the symbols. And the more you know about all this stuff as the therapist, and about symbols and mythology and all this stuff, then you can really help the person, because that's what's coming up, all of this stuff.
I think in the beginning you mentioned when you started working with Ralph, he asked you a question. And he asked you, do you want to trip? Please share this story with our listeners, because I think that it relates. Your answer to that question sort of relates to what we're talking about right now, I think.
Yeah. So Ralph, I had to fly out to see Ralph, 1 hour meeting to see whether he would work with me or not. And one of the very first questions he said to me, he said, okay, Neil, so do you want a trip? And I go, what? And he said, do you want a trip? And I go, I don't even know what you're talking about. Now, I grew up in the 60s, so I should have known what he was talking about, but I wasn't thinking about it in that way. And he said, well, do you want treatment, therapy for something, or do you want a trip? And then I go, oh, okay. Now I know what you mean by trip. No. I tripped when I was younger. Not interested in that at all. I said, I want healing. I want help for what my problems are. And then he kind of grins and says, oh yeah, I can work with you.
And the reason why I asked that at that moment was because it really, when you're talking about integration, and when you're talking about the difference between a trip and a healing experience, it really feels like the difference. Like the integration is where sometimes I tend to say, at least in my experiences, that we can walk out of a really powerful experience and maybe 20% of our healing can happen in that experience. We purge something, we release something, we learn something in that experience that just changes us in an instant. And we don't have to do any work to receive that benefit. But the other 80% really requires effort and work and research and understanding, and really like integrating all of that new awareness into our human body, our human process, our human mind. So I think that for me, that is one of the big differences, that when we're doing this work for healing, it requires integration. And if we're not integrating, we're just tripping.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we all know many people, like I said, I grew up in the 60s and 70s. We all know people who've done 100 LSD sessions and it doesn't look like anything has changed. But when you do the work for healing, you see someone who's done that work, and you saw them, I don't know, a year ago, and you go like, oh my God, they are changed.
Yeah.
What have you done? What? And then they tell you, and you go, oh yeah, no kidding.
Yeah. Yeah, that's I see the same people, especially in some of the ayahuasca circles that I've participated in. I see some of the same people showing up year after year, coming back with the same life situation, the same content, and I am able to look at that and say, well, I see what you're not doing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This is I'm going to shift. We're going to start kind of wrapping up, and I want to save enough time to really talk about the training that you're doing and to talk about some of the Groff Psychedelic Training Academy. I know that one of our mutual friends has really appreciated a lot of the discussion and the training that you offer on safety and ethics.
Mm-hmm.
And while I know that's a class in and of itself, but you're talking to people on this podcast, some of which are underground practitioners, some of them are doctors that are serving ketamine, some of them are psychotherapists that have gone through the MAPS training, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say? Because let's speak to the underground folks right now, because the doctors and the MAPS folks probably have some experience and training. I think you have to be a therapist to go through the MAPS training. What do you want to tell people? What do people really need to hear about safety and ethics when it comes to working in the underground?
Oh my goodness. It's just really, really in the underground, it's really important to still do everything correctly. And I think we should see this time as an anomaly in time where psychedelics are not legal. So if we say, okay, psychedelics are legal, then, and when they do get legal, what they're going to be under probably a medical doctor or psychiatrist is going to have to prescribe them, and there has to be therapists and so on trained. So I think we should be viewing it as if it wasn't underground. How should this really be done properly? Not in some, well, it's underground, so we don't have to do a proper assessment. We don't have to do proper follow-up and all that kind of stuff. No. And therapists, as all professionals, have professional guidelines. And you can't be a profession without the intent being for the benefit of the public. That's what defines a profession. And so this has to be for the benefit of the person, not for the benefit of you. Not, oh, I can only make $25 an hour if I work at blah, 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 but I can make $100 an hour if I'm an underground therapist, or whatever it is, $200 an hour, whatever. It's really important to view it as if it were legal, what would be the standards. And the ethics are so important. In our training, we have a whole module. It has 100 different elements on just ethics. Now, I'll tell you, I'm the year 3 director of our medical school, and it really disturbs me that our medical students, I think, get 1 hour of ethics. I'm going like,
oh, wow.
Are you kidding?
That's very interesting. I did not know that.
And I'm going like, they need to take the course that I built for psychedelics because it's all the same stuff. But even more important in psychedelics, because people can think that they're consenting to something in session when it's not what they would do. We had one person who wanted to take their clothes off. And I have no problem with nudity, whatever. But my thought was the sitters comes to me and says, can they take their clothes off? And I said, what previous agreement did you have? And they said, we didn't have a previous agreement about it. I said, they're not taking their clothes off. Mm-hmm. And so, to me, that's really, really straightforward. But lots of places it's not straightforward. Like they don't see it as straightforward. So the underground stuff needs to be treated as if it was a professional practice and regulated. And if you had a college that was licensing you, would they say that that's okay?
Yeah, I think that is the takeaway for me right there. And you probably explained it. You boiled down ethics and safety in a way that I don't know if I would have ever come up with. If you're operating underground right now, start acting like you are above ground. Start acting with the same level of ethics and integrity and professionalism that anyone might be doing in Oregon or Canada or in soon to be Colorado. If you can operate at that level, however you get there, then great. Maybe it's okay for you to proceed. But if you are unwilling to operate at that level, then maybe you should consider that it's not your time or it's not your path, one or the other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So let's dig in a little bit to the Groff Psychedelic Training Academy, because you've already said what we said. There was 100 things just in the ethics course. Tell us a little bit about what the training academy is and how do you think it's different? I just saw an article a couple of weeks ago that said there was 160. They had come up with 160 training programs for psychedelic guides. What makes this training different?
Well, so at the very outset, I would say when I go to any professional, and I can say that I studied and taught martial arts for 25 years, and always in martial arts it was, who's your teacher, and who is your teacher's teacher. Right. So knowledge lineages are very, very important. So the very first thing I would say, and what I expect people to ask me, who is your teacher? And I can say who my teacher is.
You've got some pretty good pedigree.
Yeah. And I'm not saying this just because that is the case. It was my nature. I don't have time to waste. And I don't think anybody does really, but I don't go to something second rate. When I was looking for a solution to my problem, I was going, I don't want somebody, I want Stan Groff. I want Ralph Metzner. That's what I'm after. I'm after who is the person. And so people should be asking me, who's your teacher? Okay. But they should be asking everybody that, who's your teacher? And so where does your knowledge come from? And if someone says, oh, I made this up, or I made up this system. Okay. So you're either not being honest or you're incredibly narcissistic or whatever, but it is so hard to come up with an original idea. Like one original idea in your entire life. That's really, really hard. And I haven't come up with any original ideas, but I have really good teachers. And so so what is the difference? And Stan's the guy who is alive with the most psychedelic experience on the planet. And nobody is even close to being second. Nobody. And Stan's my teacher. So I am not the teacher. Stan is my teacher. Now, eventually, people have to accept that they are a teacher. My mentor in psychiatry just died a few years ago, and he was 85. And so then I guess I still call him my mentor, but I can hear him calling to me, Neil, you're the psychiatry teacher now. But that is so important. Okay. So then what else do? We have Stan's cartography. We have, him teaching in videos there of important stuff about his cartography, about how all this fits together, about what preparation is, about what integration is, what all this stuff is. The ethics one, I basically built it from lit searches and all the, teaching ethics and medical students and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, so our training program it takes about 3 years to go through the training program. And you have to have experiences yourself. There are retreats with experiences. You have to do breath work first. I'm not taking anybody into any medicine journey without seeing them in breathwork experiences, see what their psyche is like, and going from there. And you don't have to go into the medicine. You can stay in the breathwork stream and learn breathwork. It is a great modality, absolutely spectacular. And it's not lesser, it's just different. And if you then later want to go on to becoming a Groff psychedelic therapist, then you can. There's very little extra that you have to do for that. But anyway, that's our training is modular. So it's most of the different courses are about 20 weeks long. Every second week there's a Zoom call. You do your homework, and there's often a written assignment. It doesn't have to be like an essay for each course, but you can do it point form. You can do it whatever. Just show that you've done it or that you understand and you're interested in it. And we have quizzes as well. So that's the basic model. There's knowledge that you need to know, and there's experiences that you need to have. Then you have apprenticeships and so on.
So I'm just looking at the site. So I see The Way of the Psychonaut, Volume 1, Volume 2, The Ethics of Psychedelic Psychotherapy, Setting Session, Integration. I'm just looking here.
Spiritual Emergence. You have to click the arrow to page 2 and
Music and Body Work, Spiritual Emergence, Psyche and Cosmos, Archetypical Astrology. So you're covering death and grief.
Mm-hmm.
You guys are using so much of the 60 plus years of Stan's work, 60 to 70 years of Stan's work that are really the foundational components of this. And I think to what you just said, like you're the one delivering the content today, but in so many cases, this is Stan's voice and his work and all of his research and all of his anecdotal work coming through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's wild that we and I completely agree with your use of the word, his anecdotal work, but there's so much of it. Like it's just like, and so that it's this scientism, the falsification of reality into one thing called scientism or science. Yeah. Anyway.
I do want to, now that I looked at spiritual emergence, how would you, this is coming up more and more, and now that there's more people addressing negative experiences, negative psychedelic experiences, or challenging psychedelic experiences that are turning into derealization and depersonalization, and a lot of challenging stuff that happens post-session. Mm-hmm. Do you have any advice for sitters that are working with people to help them understand, is this a spiritual emergence or spiritual emergency, or I guess emergency?
Yeah. So Stan and Christina Groff came up with the term spiritual emergence, spiritual emergency. The way that I think of it is the way that I think I try to get rid of everything binary in my thought process and say that it's a spectrum, and it's from normal through spiritual emergence to the point of spiritual emergency, where the person is not able to function in their life. Now something drastic needs to happen. And now what needs to happen itself is on a spectrum. So can they stay at home with their family, or can they stay at home with caregivers coming in to help with the process? Or do they actually need hospitalization with someone who's not going to over-medicate them, like myself, who is able to actually tell the difference between, or is hopefully able to, sometimes I can't tell yet, but the difference between spiritual emergence and full-on schizophrenia, which needs to be medicated. But that distinction needs to be made. And so we go to ethics. So you cannot work with a person if you're not willing to have, if this person goes into a spiritual emergency, what do? You have to have a contingency plan, or you should not be working with them. And so you have to know what you're going to do if any of those things happen. And they're more likely to happen if the preparation and the setting hasn't been correct. And so so everything needs to be understood. And when the person is coming out of a psychedelic session, if they still have unfinished material, you need to be working with them until that material seems to be finished. You cannot, Stan's thing is you cannot be on a schedule. You have to be able to take as much time as is required for that person to finish their material in that session. And you may have to take them back in with breath work. If the compound itself is worn off, and they still haven't finished that gestalt, then you need to take them back in with heavy breathing, and you may have to put some evocative music on to get them back into that, to finish that gestalt. They may need particular body work. You need to make sure that they don't have residual stuff in different places in their body, because that may be the thing that needs to be released, that will release this psychodynamic charge. And so it's not so simple. You need to know all these things. You need to have all these things in your toolbox, and you need to be able to continue working with the person.
Do you believe in... So I'm going to give you a binary, and I won't even ask a question. I'm just going to give you a binary and say, let me know what you think. So the binary of bad trip versus challenging journey.
So one of the things that Stan would say, there's no such thing as a bad trip. There's just trips that you don't like very much. And those are the most healing journeys. Like, if you don't go into, I mean, it's wonderful to have a great trip and, see rainbows and, get told stuff, but that's not where your healing is. Your healing's in your own process of going somewhere that is fearful for you, approaching it in spite of the fear, and being able to work through all the complicating things and then go through to the other side, which then is the beautiful thing. And so it's important to see the so-called bad trips or difficult trips as part of the healing process. And it's really important to have sitters who understand that, who don't get frightened by that, and then have make sure that you're not stuck in a really difficult place by the time the medicine is wearing off. Because you can't go into life with an unfinished gestalt. You can't do that.
Yeah. Who would be best suited for the Groff Psychedelic Training Academy?
The best suited is anybody who has a college. And so if you have a regulatory college, you're a psychologist, a therapist with a college, a social worker with a college, a physician, a psychiatrist, just anybody with a college. Now, we do train people who don't have a college as well, but they get a psychedelic psychotherapy assistant, and the expectation is that they'll be working with somebody who has a college.
So it's the same material, but the output just looks different on paper.
Yes. And
Gotcha.
And it's important. That's, ethics is right after the way the second volume 1 and volume 2 ethics is there, because it's really important not to have people not working outside of their scope of practice. They need proper training and so on. And so if you work with someone, the way that I can see it, I can see psychiatrists or physicians who can prescribe but don't know anything about all of the nuance of psychedelics. And so my hope would be that people like that would pair up. I mean, my real hope is that everybody would get training, but at least pair up so that you have all the bases covered, so that you have someone who understands physical medicine and someone who understands psychology and someone who understands how to work with people in this medicine space.
Yeah, perfect. What is your hope for, like, we're in this big transition period, MAPS, Lycos, where hopefully we'll see something in the next month or so. I find that it's interesting because Stan really does believe in the inner healing intelligence. I don't know if he uses those words, but that's one of the things that MAPS is getting kind of knocked upside the head for in some of the pushback anyway. But what do you really hope the future of psychedelics looks like?
Well, I understand that people who invest in research and development need protection to make their money back, and investors and all that kind of stuff. But it breaks my heart that psychedelics are becoming business instead of medicine helping people. And so I'm a physician, and I've spent my entire life as a physician, and I have ethical values about what a physician means. And if I think that we need to get out of this viewing psychedelics as a way to make money, and return of investment, great, good, all for that. But as a way for people to be making money, how about people just get paid fairly for what they do, no matter what they do in their life, and not get rich doing the things that are for our community, So that's my hope, is that be the case. And my hope is that I'm very frightened about MAPS making the type of therapy that they've done to be patented, so that to have MDMA and their therapy together, when all that therapy has been stolen from other people. Like, it's not anything special. Like, how about we just say you need therapy with MDMA? Like, so to narrow it down to something that's patented to make money for somebody who owns the patent, I don't agree with that, except for fair return of investment. That has to happen. Otherwise, nothing will move forward.
We're really talking about, my teachers in Peru talk about AINI, sacred reciprocity.
Mm-hmm.
And
yes,
I think what I hear you saying is, hey, let's build a system that is based on fair, equitable reciprocity. And let's move down that path, because when we get so far outside of sacred reciprocity, that's usually when people are getting hurt, or access is getting denied because the costs are so exorbitant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I'm missing Sacred Economics. If you look up that book, I'm missing his name, and I can't believe that I forgot his name. But that, what a wonderful book that is. And if we get those principles into the medicine space, I think we'll be okay.
Charles Einstein.
Charles Eisenstein. Right. Thank you.
Is there anything that we should have asked you today that we didn't?
I don't think so. I think we've. I just want to say that I just want to give a plug for Jamaica Grief Retreats. We take parents who have lost children to Jamaica, work with Jamaican physicians and therapists as well. We had them trained, and actually a couple of them are taking our training in Groff Legacy training as well as the other training that they've had. In Groff Psychedelic Training Academy with us, but we take parents who are just lost from the death of a child, like I was, and now we have it in DSM-5. It's called prolonged grief disorder, and so we take parents to Jamaica, do psilocybin mushrooms with them because it's legal there, and the transformation in those parents is unbelievable. But it's like just talk about heart work. Like, oh my God, like it's just the most amazing thing to see. These people are suicidal. They've lost their precious child, and they can't function. And we work with them before, we work with them there, and we work with them afterwards, and the transformations are spectacular. So I just want to give a plug for, if you have parents, go to JamaicaGriefRetreats.org, and we can work with them. We try to get donations to help with the cost because it is expensive, but we really try to do the right thing with all this stuff. So anyway, just a plug for that.
Beautiful. Yeah, no, thank you so much. So we got a couple of questions here in our little speed round as we wrap up. First question is, why do you do this work?
It saved my life, and I know it can save other people's lives.
Beautiful. What is the most important thing this work has taught you?
Boy, that we are all as important as each other, as pieces in this gigantic puzzle, and we can't leave one piece out or the puzzle doesn't work.
Yeah, I just imagine a puzzle hanging on a wall like that's been framed, and if there's one big giant piece missing, it's going to look funny, and it's always going to look funny. What's the best advice you'd give to someone who's new on their path, like a facilitator who maybe somebody that's coming out of a counseling degree, maybe somebody who wants to work or that doesn't have a degree that wants to start doing this work? What advice would you give to them?
So if they don't have a degree, I would say go to school, get a degree, get some way that you have a college. That will regulate. Now, that you don't have to do that. You can do it the other way, but then work with somebody who has a college. But most important thing is education. And the reason why everybody can take our course is I don't believe in restricting education. Anybody should be able to be educated. No matter whether they have a degree or not, you should be able to access information. And so just educate yourself if you can't do it, if you can't afford it or whatever, or be in touch with me. If you can't afford it, we'll try to make something happen. But, and we actually have people that, we have a fellow who is so invested in therapists, learning this that he's willing to help subsidize.
Oh, beautiful. So you just said, get in touch with you. If people want to get in touch with you, how would they best do that?
Best do that through the Groff Psychedelic Training Academy.ca, and just sign up onto our website. There's a spot there when you sign up onto the website that you can say, Neil, you said come here and you'll talk to me. I'll be in touch with you.
Well, Neil, thank you so much for all the work that you're doing. If you talk to Stan, I had an opportunity to very briefly meet Stan and Brigitte last June. Actually, we're just over a year now after Psychedelic Science. So please send my gratitude and blessings for all of their work and for your work as well. And thanks for joining us today.
Okay, thank you. I'll send Stan and Brigitte a copy of this, and So they will hear this last part on yours that you've said. And I'm talking with Stan and Brigitte at least every couple of weeks, so I'll send that forward.
Beautiful. We really appreciate it. Thank you for your time today.
Okay, thanks a lot.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Psychedelic IQ podcast. If you resonated with this episode and are ready to go deeper into your personal work and practice, visit psychedelicIQ.com for more in-depth articles, books, training opportunities, and professionally organized psychedelic experiences hosted in both North and South America. And as always, you're perfect and you're right on time, and the path is wiser than the traveler.